Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and in this program of Dollars and Cents, I'm going to talk about the book that really sort of put me back on the map, or on the map in the first place. Many of you who are watching this program are unaware of how this came into being. You've picked up my YouTube videos. I think we're at around 200,000 hits now, which is quite significant for, I never expected something like this to happen. But for those of you who have found this through YouTube, many of you are unfamiliar about how really this process began, how I wrote this book, etc., etc., etc. Well, in 2007, I presented a paper before a group called the Positive Deviant Network. And my paper was called Time of the Vulture, How to Survive the Crisis and Prosper in the Process. It was in February 2007. It was before the economic collapse happened. And I predicted at that time that real estate values would fall 40 to 70%, that the stock market would collapse, and that we'd be soon on the verge of another Great Depression. I began writing articles. I remember one of the first ones in May of that year, and these began being posted on gold websites. And in that article in May, I predicted. I said, this summer is coming up. People are readying their barbecues, but what they don't know is that a calamity is going to happen and that it is going to strike. That summer, in July, $2 billion hedge funds from Bear Stearns collapsed into nothing. And in August of that year, a worldwide credit contraction happened. The next year, Wall Street collapsed, Wall Street banks collapsed, and we have the world that we have today. Well, that group itself, the Positive Deviant Network, and how I found myself there is, I want to give some background on. In 2005, Martha and I were called up by Marshall Thurber. Marshall was a person who I'd known since 1966. I had met Marshall at Hastings Law School in San Francisco, and we became very, very fast friends. We were very, very different. Marshall was Phi Beta Kappa from back east. He had gone and chosen Hastings Law School in San Francisco because one of the professors at Harvard Law School told him that's where the best teachers were. I ended up at Hastings because I had flunked my manual dexterity test. I had decided that I was going to be an orthodontist, that they made a lot of money. I grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood, and those girls were having their teeth fixed, and even then they were being charged $3,000 to $5,000 in that time. And I figured out what a great way to make a living. So I took the manual dexterity test and got a 0 out of 1 to 10. I found myself, it was, the war was going on, the draft was on, and my plan for the future had failed me miserably. So what I did is I thought, well, what I'll do, I'll go to law school instead. And by the time I decided on this, by the time I found out my tests were so low for my manual dexterity for dental school, there were very few law schools that I could get into that were any good. And so I chose Hastings. Enrollment at Hastings was still open. Bolt, the school that I was chosen to go to, had I not come into the law career this way, had already closed its doors. So I chose Hastings. My LSAT scores were very high. I got in with no problem, and that's when I met Marshall Thurber, 1966, San Francisco. Well, Marshall and I became very, very close friends very quickly, and like I said, we were in very different spaces. By this time in the mid-60s, I was an embittered 60s radical. All right? The war was on. I knew where the war was. I knew why we were there. I knew the CIA was trying to shove the United States to take part in this colonial war against that the French had started. And the idea of the United States being a democracy, it made a mockery of it. The government that the United States was supporting in Vietnam was a brutal dictatorship supported by the CIA. All right? There I was. Marshall, however, was from back east. And he had all that gung-ho. He was going to change the world. And when we met, Marshall was trying to encourage me to help him in his mission of changing the world. I didn't want to have any of it at all. So the first thing that Marshall actually got me to do was in December of that year, as a freshman, he had been chosen to edit the law school newspaper. And he wanted me to write an article. And I said I didn't want to do anything like this. Marshall prevailed upon me. So I wrote an article. Marshall put it on the front page of the Hastings Law School newspaper. And the article almost got him kicked out of law school. My article said, quote, acts of God, church liable for acts of God. Now, looking back on this, 40 years later, I realized how crazy the 60s were. This was a University of California law school. And I don't know of you lawyers out there, but you would know that you would never expect to see an article that said, church liable for acts of God on the front page of your law school newspaper. I wrote the article. Marshall posted it. It was my feeling, my reasoning went this way, that God being just would never allow an injustice, especially in his name. He would draw the line somewhere. And in tort law, that meant that you could never sue for an act of God. An act of God is anything like a natural disaster, earthquake, a hurricane, blah, blah, blah. You can't sue anybody for an act of God. God caused it. God's liable. There's no recourse. All right? I said this obviously is wrong. God would not allow this to happen, being a just and good God. And so he must have had a solution out there, a solution that's been there right in front of our face that we couldn't see. And I surmised that here it is. The Catholic Church, or any church. I mean, they were agents of God. They said they were agents of God. And the Catholic Church especially was loaded to the gills with money. That's before they started being sued on all these pedophilia scandals, all right? And so my reasoning was, hey, you know, if you were hit by a natural disaster, all you should do was have to draw off the expenses, go down to your local church and hand him the bill. And as an agent of God, he should go to his coffers and cough it up. Well, Marshall put this on the front page of the Hastings Law School newspaper, voir dire, and almost got kicked out of school. So that was Marshall, my first thing that we did together. By the end of that year, I had pretty much thrown in the chips. All right, I quit going to class. I came back. I gave it one more whirl and flunked out of law school. The next year, I was running the food concessions at the Avalon Ballroom. I was living on Haight Street. This is the days of the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company. San Francisco was on, and I was right in the middle of it. All right? When Marshall graduated from law school in 1969, that very month, I was serving a 45-day sentence in San Francisco County Jail for sales of LSD, possession and sales of LSD. They busted me. They came to the Avalon, blah, blah, blah. They tried to pull their license. And being the hippies that they were, the family dog refused to kick me out. Those are hippies. Those are brothers. All right. Nonetheless, I was in jail when Marshall's law school class was graduating, and Marshall went on to become a real estate investor, to become a close friend of Bucky Fuller, Edwards Deming, and I went on to become a hippie of sorts. In the interim, I had presidential invitations. In the interim, I got involved in China trade. In the interim, I went to Shanghai with Mayor Dianne Feinstein. I was on her China committee. And then I had a longer stretch in prison. Whereupon, I get a phone call from Marshall in 2005 telling me that he's putting a group together that he calls a Positive Deviant Network. And Marshall said he was doing it for this reason, that in times of great change, the answers are not found by those in the center. In times of great societal stress and change, the answers are not found by those in the center of society. They are found by those on the edge, by what Marshall called the positive deviants. And he told Martha and I, since we were the most deviant people he knew, he wanted us to be a part of this experiment. We qualified, all right, on the basis of our long association with Marshall and my past. So we come to this group, and we met 4 times a year. One of the people in this group, it was a group of heavy hitters, was John Body. And John had run a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, bond hedge fund for Credit Lyonnais. It wasn't an open hedge fund. It was only for the bank. It was a proprietary hedge fund, multi-billion dollars. And John made serious money. He got in an argument with the bank. He quit, retired in his early 40s. All right? I meet John at this group. And John, who has all the credentials that you could have on Wall Street, I mean, he was in the Bond Traders Hall of Fame from Credit Magazine, I found out was worried about the economy. This is 2005, 2006. Well, John may have been worried about the economy, but I was really worried about it, far more than he was. So what I did was I started writing a paper for John, okay? And as I would jokingly say later, it's not a good sign when hippies talk about money. All right? And so I wrote this paper. It turned into a 148-page paper. I delivered it to the Positive Deviant Network in March, predicted all these things were going to happen, all hell was going to happen in the financial markets, and it did. All right? I began writing articles, as I said before. A year later, I get an email from a friend of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. I had met Jeffrey at Berkeley. He had gotten his doctorate in parapsychology, the only doctorate ever given from the University of California to anybody, and Jeffrey got it. He wrote a book called Roots of Consciousness, TV program, you know, PBS, all sorts of stuff like that. And I get an email in 2008 from Jeffrey saying, Darryl, I've been subscribing to Richard Russell's Dow Theory Letter for 8 years. The Dow Theory Letter was the longest running newsletter on stocks in the United States, anywhere. All right? And he said, Richard Russell just quoted you a page and a half on money. All right? So I began making this reputation. I write this book. It gets sold, 25 countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I began writing. That's why I'm talking to you here on TV, wherever you are. Now, I recently revised my book. I updated it. The same 148-page paper I presented at the Positive Deviant Network in 2007. It's a third edition, all right? And I went through and I read it. And when I did the third edition, I was struck with how relevant it still was. Of course, it was written in 2007. It was written at a time when nobody saw it coming. I predicted it would happen, but the bones were still there. To me, the conflict between deflation, the real estate bubbles, the stock bubbles, they were still true. And so I made a few updates on it and released the third edition. Well, I think in October I got somebody wrote a review at Amazon. This is what they wrote. This is somebody from Australia had bought the book. And he said, having read some online about the book, I couldn't wait for it to arrive from the U.S. But the updates were nothing exciting, revolutionary. Really, many of them were similar. They're similar books that tell you the importance of gold in the future. I'm a big believer in gold. But they probably put it across better. And for foreigners, a bit too Americanized. Good read, but I've bought far better books. Basically, the USA currency is doomed. Protect yourself by buying assets that will rise, keep value in either deflationary or inflationary time. All right? Well, there it is on Amazon. My book. Everybody has a different opinion about everything. Go to the same restaurant. Some people like it, some don't. So, and I understood how it was. This wasn't this person's cup of tea. Well, I was heartened last week when I got an email from somebody who told me that he had just seen my video, one of my videos, and had ordered my book and couldn't wait to read it. All right? He said, I have been invested in silver and gold for years. All right? And I liked he had read one of my articles. That's what it was. He had just read one of my articles. He said, I like the writing style. I can't wait for your book. Well, on February 26th, which is last week, I got his letter, email from him, and he sent me, he lives in Scotland. He writes this, I am loving the book. I am trying to savor it and read it slowly while pondering the severe and real catastrophe that lies ahead. Your style of writing just flows so well and has painted a picture that seems as true or more today than 6 years ago. Some of the historical facts are just fascinating to me. Stuff many would have never been aware of. The 2012 updates make the book feel even more fresh and more relevant. Well, whatever angst I felt after the reading of the review on Amazon in October that this person had posted made me feel a lot better, because I too felt this book that I had written is still relevant. And today I'm going to talk about a part that the reader from Scotland hasn't yet got to, because it's at the end of the book. And I want to tell you why I wrote it. After I had basically done my writing of economics, and that I had finished the book. I had never written a book on economics before, and it was quite a task, and I finished this book, and it was about to go to, we were going to publish it. We were going to post it, do something with it, all right? To me, the book was done. And then what happened around Christmas? Some strange thing happened to me. In Martha and I, in our house here in Tucson, we have 2 floors, and we have a walkway where you go up and to the 2nd story. That's where our bedroom is. That hallway is on both sides filled with Curtis prints. Edward Curtis. He was the one who took pictures of the American Indians. This is the picture that was on that walkway. One of the pictures. Stunning Indian girl. And as I was walking up that walkway, I looked at her, and it seemed to me she was staring right at me. And this happened time and time again. So one time, I just sat down and looked at her. And it looked like she was challenging me, saying, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do?" Well, I wrote another piece on the back of my book. And I called it the 4 markers. America 1.1, America 2.0. That the America that we see today was going to pass away to be succeeded by a new America that I called 2.0. And in that book, I wrote 4 markers, which I know my friend from Scotland has not yet read. But the 4 markers were this: global warming, America's rigged electoral voting system, Israel, and the American Indian Trust Fund. And I said, and when I went back over this book, 6 years later after I wrote it, I noted each one of those markers and what had happened. And nothing had yet of significance. But they had in a bizarre way. Global warming, America still refuses to do anything about it. More extreme weather situations are happening. We've had the hottest year on record. America still stays in denial. Electronic voting, that's how they flipped the election in 2000. We are still have a fraudulent, flawed voting system because both parties want to be able to flip it when they want. 3, Israel. 2 programs ago, I talked about Israel, and I read from the book about Winston Churchill. And in that book, in this book, here it is, Time of the Vulture, How to Survive the Crisis and Prosper in the Process. I wrote about the story about USS Liberty. I know 95, 98, 99% of you don't know that story. Google it. It's useless for me to tell you what you can find on your own. 1967, the state of Israel strafed and bombed a United States surveillance ship off the coast of Israel when they invaded the Gaza Strip, when they invaded Syria. All right? Reinforcements, they've called an SOS. They had sent planes from the Middle East, from our fleet in the Mediterranean to protect the American soldiers. I think 46 were killed in the Israeli attack. President Johnson got on the phone and called the planes back. He said, "I will not upset our ally, Israel." Israel attacked the ships. Lyndon Johnson called off the reinforcements. I want you to read what happened. USS Liberty. Find it on your own. And the last thing I talked about was the American Indian Trust Fund. Billions of dollars at stake. And you know what? The Indians won. Why? But they had to settle for pennies on the dollar. Because after I wrote the book, the United States Appellate Court held that the Indians had no right to require the United States to show the accounting for the trust fund. No right to show what the numbers were. The Indians settled for a penny on the dollar. What I want to tell you to do is this. Go back and Google these words. Sand Creek Massacre. I know most of you Americans have heard about Custer, the massacre. You've not heard about Sand Creek. Maybe you have. I don't think so. Google it. 4 markers. America. America at the end of its reign. America, after we've gone through this, 4 markers. Global warming, Israel, the rigged election system, and the American Indian Trust Fund. None of these has shown the new America is happening. My book, Time of the Vulture, How to Survive the Crisis, theoretically was about the financial crisis that now confronts this country. And so it is. It is about that crisis. But it is far more than that crisis. America is in trouble. It has been in trouble for decades. I grew up during the 60s. You people don't get it. Most of you don't. The 60s, that was troublesome. The hippies, the radicals. You know why you believe that about us? Because that's what you're told. You know why you don't understand about money? Because you weren't told about money. You know why you don't understand about Iran and Israel? Because you were lied about Iran and Israel. I want to tell you something. I and my generation grew up in that era. We grew up and we knew why we were in Vietnam. I saw when we were rolling Iraq the same situation. I knew why we had gone into Iran in the 70s. And I knew that you didn't know. I knew that you weren't told. I knew that you were lied to. Well, I am 40 years older, maybe 50 years older than I was when that period started. And I'm pretty sanguine about what's going on. You know why? My generation rose up against the oppression of the United States government. Last night when I saw in the newspaper that a gay black candidate for city council in Mississippi had been shot, I thought, wow, shades of Schwermer, Goodwin, and the third person, I forget his name. 3 civil rights workers that were ambushed by the Ku Klux Klan and the sheriff of Mississippi County, buried, and only until later, when the FBI, when J. Edgar Hoover had to be threatened to open up the case, did the United States step in. During the 60s, we knew full well whose side the government was on. We knew full well where the might and power of the United States lay. And now, 50 years later, America 1.0 is in its dying days. Dying days. And I know to most of you, this is a horrible thing. This once great power is losing its grip. So it is. But I want to tell you something. America 2.0 is going to emerge. And America 2.0 is going to reflect the values of those who created this country. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, the real heroes, the ones who created a country that present-day politicians have made a mockery of. The United States, America 1.0, is as different from the original dream of the Founding Fathers that America 2.0 will be different from the dreams of the next, of what is going to rise from the ashes. When I took and presented my paper before the Positive and Deviant Network in 2007, the economic crisis had not yet come to pass. Now it has. We are now on the verge of its collapse. Out of that collapse is going to come a resurgence of a new America, an America that will fulfill the promise of the Founding Fathers. Have faith. I wrote that in the book. Have faith. It'll get us through. Better days are coming. Better days are on the way. Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and On my last program, I read a review on my book, Time of the Vulture, that had been posted on Amazon by somebody from Australia. And then I read an email I got from a reader from Scotland with a very different reaction to the same book. And this program, I'm going to talk about an email I just got from somebody in Japan. And he said that he had seen my video where I talked about the roots of the economic system in China, and he had a few thoughts, and then he made a request. And usually I read these things, and I get a lot of email, and I do what I do. But curiously, I am going to talk about the subject that he suggested I talk about, but from a very, very different point of view. He said, could you please talk about the open door policy, America's open door policy, and how this prevented Japan, China, and Korea from falling under the European colonial powers in... Well, I am going to talk about the open door policy because I know a bit about it. I majored in East Asian studies, and but I'm not going to... my story is quite different than the story that you have been led to believe, this writer, that America's open door policy prevented East Asia from falling under the domination of the European powers. The truth is, America's self-described open door policy, it was given that name when the United States, which was just a fledgling country, America was born in 1776, throwing off the yoke of imperialism, British imperialism, and was a beacon to freedom for much of the world for the next 200 years. America's participation in the rape of China and Asia, America gave it the name of the open door. Now, why? Well, because when England tried to dominate and take over incursion into China, which was far too big for this little country which had already swallowed India. So what had happened is that by the time the United States watched what was going on in China, the British had a concession, the Germans had a concession in Qingdao, the French had a concession. All the major European parties already had pretty much carved out concessions in feudal China. So the United States goes, being late to the party, hey, let's be fair here. Let's have an open door policy. That's what they called it, an open door policy. That's sort of like the last guy to the rape walking in and saying, hey, come on, let everybody have a chance. And American history books call it the open door policy, and so it was. I graduated with a degree in East Asian Studies in 1966 from the University of California, Davis. And it was a very curious time regarding East Asian Studies because at the time China was a communist country and it was basically verboten. You could not... I mean, I know how you're raised in this country and you think intellectual discourse is free and open and it's a, the marketplace of ideas. Well, it is the marketplace of ideas. But just like the U.S. marketplace, it's bought and sold. In 1965, I happened to attend one of the top symposiums on East Asia. I hadn't even gotten my BA, and I don't quite remember how I even was invited to or attended this symposium that was held on the campus of the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena. But what I do remember is those who were speaking at that symposium were the top thinkers on East Asia. John K. Fairbanks, professor at Harvard. Franz Schumann, University of California, Reischauer. The big names were all giving talks on their areas of expertise. And I happened to be there. And I remember on my way there, I'm sitting next to another professor. I wasn't a professor. And he turned to me because I happened to be sitting next to him. And he said, I wonder who gave the okay. And what he meant was this. Somebody way high up, somebody in Washington, D.C. had to give the okay for China and East Asia to now be discussed in the middle of the Cold War. That's your marketplace, my friends. Those of you who know about Ludwig von Mises probably don't know that when he came to the United States after the end of World War II, one of the greatest economic thinkers of the 20th century was never given a tenured position at a U.S. university. He was given a teaching position at New York University and was never paid for it. His salary had to be given by donations. Why? Because Austrian economics was totally contrary to the paper-based theories of John Maynard Keynes and Milton Friedman. One's on the left, one's on the right. What they shared in common was an antipathy towards gold and a support of the British banking system. The Austrian school, which has now gained credence of late, because it was the only economic school that really criticized and foretold what was going to happen if the United States and the world kept on its mad debt and credit-based lemming-like rush for the cliff. For those who did go and get your degrees, I remember an email I got from somebody probably around 2007 when I first started writing, and he said, you know, Mr. Schoon, he said it's a sad commentary on the economic thought in this country. He said, I got my degree in economics, an advanced degree from the University of Chicago, and never once did I hear about Ludwig von Mises in the Austrian school. Well, there's a reason he didn't hear, because he wasn't told. And at the times in the mid-1960s, the subjects of basically China and East Asia were not on the table. But somebody gave the go-ahead, and I was there at that conference. I remember listening to John K. Fairbanks talk that day. The next time I was going to see John K. Fairbanks was 14 years later. 13 years later, I don't remember the year. But I was in China, I was in Beijing. I was on the steps of the old Beijing hotel. I remember what I was wearing, because not very many people were dressed that way in China at the time. I had a Hawaiian shirt, dark glasses, and I watched as a phalanx of Russian limousines pulled up to the steps of the old Beijing hotel with the little ambassador flags on them. And out of the first limousine, got this tall man came out. And I thought, I wonder if that's John K. Fairbanks. And he's coming up the steps, and I said, Dr. Fairbanks. And he looked at me, he said, yes. I said, my name is Darryl Schoon. I read your books in college. And I shook his hand. That was 14 years later. I got into China in 1976. I was there when the air was still clean. I was there when the Chinese still wore blue Mao coats and said things like, we will continue to criticize the policies of Deng Xiaoping and uphold the policies of Mao Zedong. So I know a bit about East Asia. I came back later. I accompanied Dianne Feinstein to Shanghai and gave a talk in 1982 before the trading delegations. I know a bit about East Asia. So when I got that email request from this gentleman in Tokyo or Japan to talk about the open door policy and how it prevented Korea, Japan, and China from falling under the hegemony of Western domination, European domination, I found it a bit, I had never seen that point of view. And maybe that was the point of view he was told in Tokyo. I don't know if he's attending a university over there, but I do know this, that the Japanese used their imperialistic designs on East Asia as a cover. The Japanese have never apologized for what they did in World War II. The Germans did. The Japanese never did. That's at the cause of the route over those islands off the coast of China. The Japanese right wing every year goes to the shrine and pays homage to the war dead. I'm sure China and other countries recognize the right of every country to pay homage to those who've died in the service of those countries. But it particularly rankles East Asian countries when the Japanese have never apologized for what they did, the atrocities they committed previous to World War II in China. And the idea that somehow America's open door policy was like a protecting shield over East Asia that prevented the domination of European powers in China is particularly an egregious affront to the truth. What happened was this. England was basically the biggest street gang in the world in the 18th and 19th centuries. They took over much of the world, and they did it with force. I remember reading their thing about free trade. And how Britain got Turkey to engage in free trade during the 19th century by taking their gunships into Istanbul and blasting the Turkish army and navy into submission. The British call this free trade. Well, what was free trade? Well, the right to force countries to take your paper money instead of gold and silver. That's what free trade is. All right? You hear, when I was in school, you heard a lot about, the free flow of currencies. Free flow of currencies. And how England, the United States, was trying to open up markets for the free flow of currency. You know what free flow of currency really means? It really means that the Western powers could buy up all the goods and services of other countries without giving them anything but their paper coupons. When Bretton Woods, the agreement, was signed after 1944-45, the British gold standard had fallen by the wayside because they were decimated. I think they had no gold by the end of World War II. I wonder where they got the rest of the gold that they did end up with, that they actually sold 40% of in 1999. May have come from China. May have come from China. But nonetheless, in 1944, when John Maynard Keynes had this idea of the Bancor to become the new world reserve currency, which would have given countries parity in international trade, the United States stepped in and said, no, no, no. We want to have it based on the U.S. dollar. We have all the gold. We will back our currencies with U.S. dollars, and that's the way we'll do it. Fair, fair, fair enough. All right. When Bernard Baruch, who was the economic advisor to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, saw what was happening in Bretton Woods, he turned to somebody and said, "This is wonderful. We're going to be able to buy up everything the world produces with our paper currency." Well, the United States had an extraordinary advantage after World War II. All right? What I want to say is this. The idea that America's open door policy protected East Asia from the predations of Europe is bogus at its core. What happened was that was the excuse used by Japan's imperial court why it invaded China. The Japanese said, we invaded China to protect China from Europe. That's like, I raped... This is like some guy saying he raped the girl to protect her from being raped by somebody else. I mean, this guy wrote me from Japan. Maybe that's a story that the Japanese are being told in their universities. I never heard it. But I want to tell you something. It's as bogus as the fact of the Nanking incident in Manchuria. It's as bogus as 9/11. It's as bogus as any other excuse any world power has used to get its own way. The Japanese rape of East Asia was extraordinary and brutal in the extreme. We talk a lot about gold. We talk a lot about silver on this program. And I guess this is where I make the transition to Yamashita's gold. All right? I didn't know where this program was going to lead, but this is where we find ourselves. The Japanese invaded Manchuria, called Japanese Manchukuo, as a part. What they decided to do was, since the West was over there conquering what they could, the Japanese, which militarized and modernized its army and navy at the end of the 1800s, decided to do the same thing in Asia. And of course, the biggest plum was China. So, a heavily industrialized Japan. Let me back up here. This is fertile field for discussion. I see countries much like personalities, all right? Like Asia, in a way, is the flip side of the West, okay? The Japanese are like the Germans. They succeed at the same thing. They're good at the same things. In fact, when the West invaded Japan, Commodore Perry came into the harbors in Japan with the American gunboats. I guess that's part of our open door policy, except we got to Japan first. All right? Open door. What a wonderful concept. That's like Operation Freedom. Who thinks up these things? Who believes them? But when Commodore Perry came into the Japanese harbor and forced the Japanese to open up, the Meiji era began, and the Japanese figured, holy smokes, we better do something. These guys got some mojo going. So what the Japanese did, seeing the threat of the West for what it was, a threat, they sent a delegation of Japanese diplomats and educators and learned people to Europe to find out what was going on over there. How did these guys end up with this, that they could threaten us? We are a warrior nation, and we knew when we were beaten. We knew when the odds were against us. So the Japanese, quick to adapt, sent a delegation to Europe to figure out what was going on. The delegation returns and makes a report. And the report said this. This is what they're doing. This is what they're doing. Blah, 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 blah. We recommend copy Germany. Why? Because the Germans already thought like the Japanese. The Germans were authoritarian. The Germans were hierarchical. The Germans were precise, just like the Japanese were. It's no accident that the Germans and the Japanese made the best optics. It's no accident that when it came to machinery, the Germans made the best cars and the Japanese did later. It's no mistake that in an era of industrial production, the Japanese and Germans would both excel. They're flip side of the same coin. One's in Asia, one's in Europe. And it's no mistake when the German fascists decided that what the world needed was a little order, that the Japanese on the other side of the world went, sounds good to us. All right? So the Japanese went on their own imperialistic tear. And like most thugs, they lied to themselves why they were doing it. Oh, we're going to make the world better. This is what the United States told people. We're going to make the world better for democracy. As we blew them up with our guns and armies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The British said, oh yeah, we're going to... No, I don't think the British ever lied to anybody why they were doing it. Americans had to. Because America's birth was based on freedom from tyranny. So when America started tyrannizing the world, they had to make up some slogans that we weren't tyrannizing the world. The British invented imperialism. They didn't have to make an excuse to anybody. We're in it for the money, and we're in it for the power. When the Americans do it, they had to lie to themselves. and to each other. And they did it. Anyway, the Japanese were a little more naked about it. Except later, this little thing about protecting East Asia from Europe, they could sell it to themselves. I want to tell you something. The Chinese never bought the story. The Chinese never bought the cover story of Japanese aggression, that they were doing it for the good of Asia. Because that's all it was a cover story for naked, imperialistic, militaristic aggression. Open door. I do have to thank this gentleman from Tokyo, from Japan, sending me this absolutely bizarre cover story. But I'm used to cover stories. I grew up in latter-day America. I grew up in a country that had been founded on the most profound, fundamental democratic processes, and watched this country descend into a virtual police state. Not a virtual police state. We are a police state. The United States has by far the greatest percentage of its citizens behind bars, far more than communist Russia, far more than communist China, far more than South Africa. That pretty much qualifies you as a police state. The fact that you throw people in prison for smoking pot, I guess that makes an exception. That takes it out of the realm of a police state, in your mind. Just like it takes it out of the realm of the Japanese, that what they did in East Asia was for the good of Asia. Well, there's a long way to go, and not much time to get there. I've been at this for a while. I've been watching the world stage from my own little perch. I never expected to be giving these videos out and people writing me from Australia, Scotland, and Japan for my point of view. I never expected. Yeah, and I really loved one I got from Brazil. The guy said, Darryl, when you have a new video, we go, look, Darryl Robert Schoon's got another video. And it's warming to my heart. It's warming to my heart. And because this was not expected, and in a way it's needed. Not that it's going to change the world, because the world is already changing. It's not you nor I that are going to pull the little triggers that are going to bring the new age into being. The new age is coming of its own accord. The world of domination, repression, the dark forces, they're there. I mean, one of my friends, we had a discussion, he was talking about the Illuminati, and he used the word illiterati. I loved it. Illiterati. And I looked at him and I said, you know, that about sums it up. The Illuminati's control of the illiterati is coming to an end. And I tell you, my friends, it is. I end all my articles with the words, buy gold, buy silver, have faith. And as I've said before, have faith is the hardest to get because you can't buy it. There's no options on faith. There's no futures market in faith. All right? There's no way for you to go down to your local faith dealer and get it. In fact, most people looking for faith are scared shitless by the places they try and get it from. They walk into a house of faith and somebody's scaring them about their unworthiness, about how they're not doing God's will. I want to tell you something. Have faith. Have faith that those places are wrong. They're using guilt and fear to scare you into control. Have faith, my friends. It'll get you through the times that we are in right now. Welcome to the end game. Welcome to the end times. America 2.0 is on the way. The Earth 2.0 is on the way. Have faith.